Hello and welcome to Enchantment of Eternity's review for the Squire of Gothos, which is episode 17 of season 1 of Star Trek, the original series. So this video is part of a series of videos where I review episodes of Star Trek as determined by my user polls. The episode to win my latest user poll is the Squire of Gothos. Now, if I'm being completely honest, the user poll for Star Trek the original series was actually a tie between the Squire of Gothos and the Way to Eden. Now, I do have plans to review the Way to Eden in the future, so I decided to choose the Squire of Gothos. So those of you that did select the Way to Eden, don't worry, I will be getting to that eventually. But for now, I decided to cover the Squire of Gothos. So, the Squire of Gothos is the first season episode where the Enterprise encounters a strange being who refers to himself as the Squire, who kidnaps Kirk and Sulu, and when McCord and the others go after them, he torments them and has them play these games and sort of plays with the Enterprise as he has these godlike powers. And eventually, Kirk tries to trick him to get the Enterprise to get away, and thus sacrificing himself. And that's where Kirk learns that Trelane is actually just a child, and the powerful entity parents come and take the child away and punish him for being naughty. So I always really liked this episode. I thought this was always like a really fun episode. I mean, there's not much to it, but I think it's like well constructed, well put together. Like, there's no part of the episode I think is boring or drags. And it does a good job of pace, of disseminating the information, how they first encountered this strange planet, and then Kirk and Sulu go missing. And I love how the landing party consists of the only main character is Dr. McCoy. I think this is like the only time they did that, which I think is a really interesting concept. So they have Jaeger bombs, sorry, a geologist or some scientist named Jaeger who beams down, and Lieutenant DeSalle, which I think this is his first appearance, and he appeared 2 more times in the original series. So he's one of those characters who, in the episode he appears in, who's just as important as like Sulu or Uhura, but he only appears in 3 episodes, so he was never a major cast member. But anyway, so I thought this was just a really fun episode. I thought it was really engaging. Like, there was a couple times where I put this episode in my top 10, but when I watched it again more recently, I was like, nah, it's not really top 10 material. I mean, it's not that great, but it's still good. Like, it's still a really solid episode of the original series. Now, watching in the retrospect, of course, brings up a lot of different connotations, and the obvious one is he seems like Q. And the real answer to why that is because, of course, they use motifs, particularly in the Roddenberry era of Star Trek, the original series, Next Generation. Roddenberry and just that era, so maybe some of the other writers as well, were really obsessed with having godlike entities come and fuck with the crew members. I mean, we had this several times throughout the original series, be it Trelane was the first example, but there's not the first, you got Charlie X is actually the first, it's actually kind of similar to this, and then you have like the Apollo god later in season 2, and then you just had other like really powerful entities, and then you had that motif in Next Generation as well, with like people like Kevin Osprey and stuff like that. So it was a really common thing. But the Q one, which of course became the most famous and well-known one because Q was a really great character who kept reappearing because he worked as a character, is most similar to Trelane. Like, Trelane is the one who's most similar to Q. He has that same sense of being mischievous and just fucking using his like omniscient powers to just fuck with the crew of the Enterprise for his own enjoyment. Trelane to a greater extent, though. So I do think that when they were writing Q, they probably took inspiration from Trelane because Next Generation was, especially when it first started, and Q appeared in the very first episode, Next Generation was trying a bit, was relying on the original series, if you know what I mean, because it was the first Star Trek spinoff, so they were trying, I mean, they're naked now, for fuck's sake. Like, they were depending too much or leaning too much into doing the stuff the original series had already done, so I think they were using other characters of Trelane as a crutch, or at least a jumping point to do something similar but take it into a different direction. Now, I do have to mention that there was a non-canon novel. Of course, all novels are non-canon, but there was a novel that was a hardcover novel. In fact, this is one of my favorite novels. I did a Patreon-only series a couple years ago where I talked about my favorite Star Trek books, and this came up. It was a book called Q Squared. Written by Peter David, who is a well-known Star Trek novelist, but he's very hit or miss to me. He's like a comic book writer, and some of the ways he writes is very fast and loose with the characters, particularly Riker, who comes off more as a swashbuckling hero, or maybe 80s action hero type. But anyway, Q Squared, and brought in elements of yesterday's Enterprise, because it showed that same like parallel universe, although it's an alternate timeline, but in this book is a parallel universe where it had the alternate. But anyway, the book Q Squared posits that Trelane is a Q and a child Q, which of course is contradicted later in Voyager, where they say the Q don't have children and made a big deal when they had children, but this book was written before that. And that Q has to look after Trelane, and Trelane basically tries to destroy the multiverse by getting all these parallel universes to intersect and collide for his own enjoyment, and he's like creating chaos because he wants to like basically destroy everything. And so Q eventually has to kill him in a very sad moment. I actually thought that was one for a while that was my favorite Star Trek book, and I still think it was one of the better Star Trek books. But I think having Trelane be a Q is a bit of a stretch. I mean, it's obvious that this was the initial inspiration for Q, because they're very similar in their way. But in this episode, you see that Trelane has a device that is amplifying his powers, and so when Kirk destroys it, he like loses a lot of his powers. Not all of it. Like, he's still able to come back, but it does hurt him and allows Kirk and the crew to get away, and he's very pissed off about it. So that's very much not Q, because Q does not need a device to amplify his powers. Q is just omniscient. So really, Trelane is not as powerful as Q. But anyway, I mean, there's some episodes of the original series that try to do this like silliness of, because in here we have this like 16th or 17th century setting, just historical Earth setting, and he has the yeoman's dress up in huge dresses and dances with them and challenges Kirk for a duel. Oh, he challenged me to a duel and stuff like that, which I actually think really works in this episode. There are other episodes of the original series, namely Plato's Stepchildren, that tried something similar with setting things in the historical Earth setting with powerful beings that are fucking with the crew, that did not at all work and came off as really stupid, silly, and ridiculous. Whereas this actually doesn't. Like, this straddles the line. This manages to actually come off convincingly and not too silly, and you do kind of buy the character interactions, because he's kind of like Q, how he works in that manner. Now, of course, the big twist ending, which I already talked about in this episode, is that Trelane is really a child. And this makes a lot of sense, particularly in the way like children were viewed in the 60s, as they were often viewed as really naughty, and they would fuck with like animals or insects and stuff. This is before the invention of video games in the 80s and the internet in later decades, where kids don't have to resort to like tormenting animals to keep themselves entertained because now they can just play video games or go on the internet. But in the 60s, I feel it was a lot. I mean, I'm sure it's still a thing today, but it was a lot more commonplace, I feel, in the 60s of having this view of like the Dennis the Menace type who would just like to screw with people or screw with their toys or screw with other children or screw with adults, as Dennis the Menace did, as a way of getting enjoyment. Or screw with pets. I think that's the main focus of this. What this episode is getting at is the children who have pets and they kind of torment them and fuck with them because they find it amusing. And that's really what I got as the inspiration from this episode. Is that, and that's why the reveal that he was a child makes so much more sense because it's these high concept episodes that the original series is actually really good at doing. Where you think if there is a really, really powerful being that's really omniscient and is way beyond us, where we're like dogs or cats compared to them, like the way dogs and cats compare to us. And if we have children who likes to mess around with like dogs and cats for their own amusement. Couldn't it be the same situation where there's a powerful being, omniscient being that's so far above us, where they have children, where they like to fuck around with us for their own amusement? And I think that's actually a really interesting concept, and I think it's the way they play it out is works so well. And I love the revelation of how like they don't immediately tell you this, and how Kirk has to figure it out towards the end of the episode. Of course, he starts acting too much like a child once they want the audience to know. Like, he wasn't acting that much like a child before, but as soon as they want the audience to know, he's like, I would have, I should have, and they're too obvious a child, which is kind of contrived writing, but whatever. It still works. I like how, Kirk is able to figure out, it's like, you have a lot to learn about everything, don't you? And then that's when the parents come in there like, oh, we're sorry, Kirk. Oh, our apologies. And you could think that, again, that's kind of analogous. Like, if parents find their kids messing around and tormenting pets, they'll stop them and they'll try to pet the pet and be like, it's okay, I'm sorry. Give them some treats to try to make them feel better. So it's kind of the same thing here. Because these powerful entities don't really relate to Kirk as equals. It's obvious that they do see Kirk as a lesser being, but just as adults would be kind to pets, these beings are being kind to Kirk and like, oh, we're sorry that he troubled you. We'll fix everything. We'll put everything back, which I liked. And again, that's very un-Q-like, because the Q they're not really children in that manner, and the adult, even if there was that situation like that book deposit, the adult Qs wouldn't give a fuck. They wouldn't come and be like, oh, we're sorry. But anyway, at least I don't think so. I mean, maybe the argument could be made other way, but so I thought that was a very clever ending, and I thought it made this a good episode. I thought the actor who played Trelane did a great job. Apparently, the writer who wrote this episode really liked the actor, but the director wasn't sold, and so they really had to fight for this actor to get the part. But of course, once he read for the part, apparently, like, the director loved him immediately and hired him, and I can see why. I think now this is the same actor who would later go on to play Koloth in The Trouble with Tribbles, which I don't think he does that good of a job. And then they bring him back for Deep Space Nine to revive the character of Koloth, which I don't know. He's fine. He's not a bad actor in Deep Space Nine. It's just he doesn't work as well as a Klingon, because the Koloth in Trouble with Tribbles is kind of like a variation of Trelane. It's like, ha ha, my dear Captain Kirk. And that's when Klingons were nothing like what they eventually became. So when he came back to Deep Space Nine, and after they reinvented the Klingons and tried to be like what the Klingons are now, or at least what they became in the 90s, it's not really his thing. But I think he does an amazing job as Trelane. Particularly having that childlike veneer to him, which makes you really buy it, and not making it too obvious to where like immediately as soon as you see him, like, oh, that's a child. But once you do learn the twist, you're like, oh, okay, I see that now. It makes total sense. So yeah, I really enjoyed this episode. Again, I think maybe not, and probably part of the reason why I wanted to put this in the top 10 is because I wanted to give it more recognition, because it seemed like this episode did not get that much recognition as far as the original series episode goes. It seems to get overlooked a lot, in my opinion. So I guess part of the reason why I wanted to put it in the top 10 is to be like, look, let's acknowledge this episode and how good it is. But really, it's not top tier. Even though it is fun, enjoyable, well paced, and well acted, and everything like that, there's nothing that really pushes up into greatness. But it's still a really good episode. So anyway, my rating for the Squire of Gothos out of 10 is an 8. Extremely good. As I said, really enjoyable episode. Well paced, really fun. The actor did just such a great job as Trelane, and having this mischievous character who is, I think, obviously very clearly the inspiration for Q and such, and that's why they're so similar. Anyway, that is it for my review of the Squire of Gothos. I shall return to cover the other poll winners and my other Star Trek polls, The Next Generation, Deep Space Nine, Voyager, and Enterprise, so be sure to keep an eye out on that. Also, check out my channel as I cover many other shows, many other Star Trek videos. I'm doing Star Trek The Next Generation, covering every episode, one season at a time. And I also cover other shows like The Expanse and more, so be sure to subscribe so you can keep up with all of that. And thanks a lot for watching.